Coming up next on Landscapes Through Time, artist David Dunlop travels to the Normandy coast where Turner painted the Harbor of Honfleur.
This is Honfleur in the mouth of the Seine, and I'm here with a question. How could the son of a hairdresser in London, born at the end of the 18th century, 1775, with no real prospects for greatness from birth, turn out to be England's greatest landscape painter? I'm talking about J.M.W. Turner. Matisse said of Turner, "This is the one artist who liberates us all from copying nature." I'm David Dunlop, I'm a landscape painter, and I'm going to put my easel, and my students are going to put their easels in places that Turner explored here in Honfleur. We're going to see what his ideas were, try some of his experiments in watercolor and in oil. I'm hoping we'll unravel some of Turner's mysteries. This is an antique harbor, Honfleur. From the 11th century, the Vikings were here. It's got a history that long and rich. In the 19th century, this place attracted lots of landscape painters. Right here is where Monet meets Boudin, and it's on the beaches right out here that he shows him how to do the plein air painting. Corot was in this town. Renoir made it here. Turner was here too, and he paints that Lieutenance. There were once 4 of them, and they were all around the harbor. It's from the 1600s. Turner comes over here to this northern coast of France many times in his life, the last in 1845. Earlier than that, 1832, he's doing watercolors and oils. When he does the oils, he does them back in London in his studio. When he does the watercolors, usually they're also done back in London in his studio. So what's he doing in Honfleur? As a young man, he does some quick watercolor sketches, very small, a watercolor beginning perhaps, and then he also does some watercolors that are a little more evolved, maybe in his hotel or studio. But principally, the work in color is not done on location, just quick sketches, and he'll pile up a lot of sketches. Let me show you how that process works. I was here earlier painting a couple of watercolors side by side, painting them simultaneously. Now if I were Turner, I would have had more. But you see, he would change the palette, he would change the form, he might change the composition, move it this way, move it that way. Different papers, different surfaces. Not be concerned with getting doors and windows or people or specific anecdotal details. He was early in his life, but by the time he's a mature artist, by the 30s and the 40s, he's very liberated, self-confident, just like Titian, just like Rembrandt. Before I explore Turner's color beginnings, let me show you something of the history of Turner's painting. I've got some paintings here. You'll notice that this painting has a lot in common with this painting. The structure, the light, the design. There's a big territory here with a building and a tree, and then an open space, more architecture with light flooding through it. This is Claude from the 1600s. He's a Frenchman who moved to Italy. I can't overestimate the influence of Claude on Turner. Not only because of the composition, but the light. The idea of a golden or amber glazed light with the light emanating from within the picture. First time he encounters Claude in a private collection, he's with some other artists, and they note, Turner broke down in tears. What made him cry was the thought that he would never be able to paint that beautifully. He left over 350 oil paintings and approximately 20,000 works on paper. Among those works on paper are pieces like this. This is a watercolor sketched on location on a blue paper. Sometimes he used colored paper, sometimes not. And then he augments that with little touches of Chinese white and opaque gouaches, transparent washes, scratches in with a knife blade. He might add a little chalk, white chalk. He was not orthodox in his approach to watercolor. Of course, all great watercolorists take these liberties, because what they're after is an effect. These washes, which you see here in soft washes in a later watercolor, also here on the northern French Normandy coast, they're much washier, sketchier, and suggestive. Because the older Turner gets, the more suggestive he gets, the more ambiguous his pictures get. They are less narrative. Now I'm going to show you one of his color beginnings and sketch process. Before he does a watercolor beginning, he's got his sketchbook. He always has his sketchbook with him. His sketchbooks were frequently about exactly this size. The same size as a Delacroix. And he uses them just as Delacroix would have used his sketchbook. Remember, they're contemporaries, Delacroix and Turner. So he's just doing a little note-taking. What he does is he'll take a look at the profile of this landscape, of these buildings, and he'll do a little sketch. That's a profile. And then he'll do it again, smaller or larger. Then he takes these profile sketches back to his studio and works them up into watercolors. The beginnings. And this is on an untreated but sized piece of paper. I'll go over here and pull up some color, and that's all he would do is a little gamboge yellow. He liked a chrome yellow because it was new, so he was thrilled when this came along. It was a fugitive color. Get into the water here. And a little perspective maybe. And you've got it. We're talking 60-second, maybe minute and a half watercolors just to take some color notes as a memory trigger. Now the next step is how do you get these sorts of atmospheric effects, this sort of spontaneity, this sort of luminousness to happen in oil? Let's go to the color. We've got cobalt blue, an azurite blue. They synthesize an ultramarine blue, a carmine. And here's the burnt sienna, the raw sienna, sort of a butterscotch. This is an old yellow, gamboge yellow, and an opaque pink. So here's a violet. Now, of course, there'd be white. Our white is titanium white. His white is warmer, a lead white. Let me get some brushes down here and pencil in a design. And it's a rough sketch. Turner had lots of practice drawing. He at first thought he would be an architect. Here's a young man, son of a hairdresser. His mother goes mad and they have to put her in an asylum. He doesn't go to the best schools, but he has some fortunate breaks, and he's recognized very early in his career as one of the youngest artists ever to receive associate memberships in the Royal Academy, and then full membership, and then becoming professor of perspective, not only linear, but atmospheric perspective, the perspective of air, the idea that colors diminish in their relationships in value and distance, that things become vague and atmospheric and gauzy in the distance. So he would want to make sure that I was paying attention to principles of linear perspective. I've got a sight line right about here. I'm going to bring the light right through this picture here. I'm going to make a triangle. These are the sort of great liberties that Turner himself would take with pictures, because he said the power of the imagination was what made things exciting. Now I've got a rough structure that I can respond to, and I'll just loosely lay it in. Lubricate the brush. Remember, I'm going to paint thinly so that I can get the idea of the watercolor effect in oil. That was his goal. So we'll go over here and make a neutral color out of this ultramarine blue. Let me just show you how deep and beautiful that is. It's much more transparent than the cobalt blue. See how opaque that is? And when I mix that with something like this brown earth color, I get this gray. Just going to lay in, and it's rough and free. Young Hockey, as he called him, Farnley Hall, was invited to go with Turner to do watercolor, and he said there were brushes flying, there was water, there was everything going crazy. And then all of a sudden an image started to appear, but first it's a very loose laying in. Turner spoke a little French, was enough to get by as a traveling artist because he loved to travel. Whether or not it was Italy or Switzerland, he couldn't wait to travel. He was still making plans to travel into his final years, which is 1851. Now I'm going to lay in something else around that, still using the large brushes. I use a little milky violet there. Now he's really aware that dark needs to go against light and light needs to go against dark, because Turner has some interesting theories on color. He had every access to Newton's idea that color is a function of light. That every color, the blue of my shirt, is only blue because that's the color that you're seeing, not yellow, not green, because yellow and green are being absorbed. Red is being powerfully absorbed. The blue is being rejected and sent back to you. Newton makes the discovery, but a lot of artists have a hard time with that. Newton makes the first color wheel. Goethe writes a big book on color, and it's an important book for Turner. But Goethe, like Turner, believes that color is a manifestation of darkness and light, and that colors are intrinsic. In other words, that there's something eternally blue about my shirt, no matter what the light was. It's not true in terms of physics, but that is what they believed. Now, if you're going to paint this all wet, you need to start to shape it and work this long snake of paper towel. He would be using bread, rags, newspapers. Turner quotes paintings. All great painters like to quote paintings. And I'm going to be quoting from a couple of his paintings, some of the ideas. One of his paintings is a painting at Brest, where he softly dissolves edges of buildings. You don't see details, you feel or sense an atmosphere which contains and envelops the buildings. And that may be where Monet got the idea of an envelope of light. Because if there's anyone who posits the idea of an envelope of light, it would be Turner. He exaggerates, like Delacroix, as a romantic sort of art. He's a part of the period of the sublime. And he wants to provide you with a heightened sense of feeling. So exaggeration of perhaps the sense of the height of these buildings would serve his purpose, his poetic license. When you're going to mix a yellow or something else like this in, you might want to warm it up a bit so it doesn't go too green. The idea of dissolving the buildings, dissolving the edges so that you're left with a vapor, because it's the air that gives you the feeling of color and space. Broken edges suggest the presence, but dissolved edges just give you volume and space. And Turner was interested in illuminated air. He's going to experiment on his palette like I'm experimenting on mine. This has no relation to the colors that are here. That would be a profound inspiration for people like Van Gogh who want to take on expressive color. Expressive color is color that isn't there, but is imagined to be there. It's exciting to paint here in Honfleur. This whole boat basin is lined with cafes. A couple of my students are painting in front of some other ones. I hear the French conversation, the rattle of teacups. There's so much vitality in this town. You feel a part of the fabric of the community. Because he's conscious of watery reflections and that sort of thing, I might take a color, as he would, that we pushed in here and then reflect it down in here. Here's a chance to do some scrubbing and see how that's going to do. And then lay in more paint, scrub, lay in more paint. Because this is Turner working with his hands, to paint with the hands. He'll take off more and more paint. We can go right back and find the source of the light. He understood that the light was a deity. From the ancient Egyptians of Amun-Ra to Incas and Aztecs to Druids, light gives us life, and life is meaning for Turner. Even as he dies, he is found crawling to the window searching for the light. I've been playing with a violet-yellow contrast. See, yellow and violet. They help make the picture more vibrant. And he was aware of those sorts of color combinations, those complements, yellow, violet, red, green, blue, orange. They give the painting more power. Now the light always wants to expand against the edge of the darkness. And the darkness wants to contract against the light. This echo starts to give you a sense of, oh, this must be water because there's an echoing shape. It's a flawed echo. This is his cobalt blue with white. And here's where I'm quoting Brest, where he puts the cobalt blue up on the edges to hover in and work a little bit of a circular motion around the painting, because circles and vortexes, those are forms that are classical, they transcend time, they're pancultural, panhistoric. We get them from Virgil, we get them from the Greeks. In fact, Socrates speaks of the abstract perfect forms, those things that are perfect in nature. I'm making this violet a little browner. I'm toying with textures and color complements, because I have to experiment. If I'm at all true to Turner, it's about experimentation. And he passes that lesson on to John Ruskin, who puts it in his lectures. And that book, even Monet says 90% of Impressionism, in a really carefree moment, is owed to Ruskin, from this touching of opposite colors next to one another and this sense of enthusiasm and experimentation still with you. Having an idea, a poetic idea, and then experimenting with this idea, then analyzing the experiment. It's the basis of scientific method. Hypothesis, experiment, analysis. And that's Turner. That's Da Vinci. That's Delacroix. These are men who are both classical and romantic. I'm continuing to dissolve the details and just put these complementary territories, which you, as Gombrich says, the art cultural historian, project to be a little building, a piece of architecture, a little harder line. It's got to be architectural or architectonic. A softer territory must be biomorphic, trees. Because he was a poet, he believed in poetic symbolism. Claude or Corot, and sometimes Turner, when he's in a Claudian mode, he'll use the tree to frame the picture, because in the Garden of Eden is the tree of knowledge, and opposite the tree of knowledge is the tree of life. And it's that relationship between the tree of knowledge and the tree of life that we have a form on the left, a form on the right. They have a relationship reaching back to these Middle Eastern mythic origins, religious origins. Turner, as I said, took months. I'm just here for an afternoon. But I've had a lot of fun trying to pursue some of those ideas of chasing the light, letting the evocation of light work, not transcribe, not mimic, not copy. I'm responding to a condition that's present, feeling poetically. That was Turner's approach, a transmutation of his feelings into light with paint. Sarah, I love what you've been doing, but you had a certain approach.
I wanted to stick with the colors Turner used in his simple sketches, the sienna, burnt sienna, and the ultramarine blue.
And you did. And I like this idea of looking down and out. It's like a vertical scan. You've done something also novel and experimental, again, like Turner, is you put this watercolor on linen, on primed linen. Erase it, it comes off. With water, it comes off. Glazing it and building layers is a little difficult because, as you notice, it starts to bead, probably.
Yes, I was hoping you could help me with that.
Stiffer paint. I'm going to glaze and work on the atmospheric perspective as he would dissolve the space back here. So we'll just dissolve the space. Okay. I'm going to go down here to the white with the pink. I'll just obscure the distance into this gauzy atmosphere and subdue some of your color. See how we can get that fog with a little pink glow? Now I'll make it a little richer as we come up, and I'll go with a little lavender just to see what would happen. And because if we don't like it, it isn't a problem, you can erase this. Now I'm putting in layer upon layer that is just a little darker. I'm going to put a little bit more dark into it, a little deeper lavender. See how I'm building up the value down here?
So I was afraid this wouldn't go with the rest of the painting, but you're going to work it into
because this red brown, it's the brown with red in it, and the blue, ultramarine blue, has some red in it. We're getting away with this, and then it just shifts into a gauzy atmosphere. Here we go. That belt of fog and atmosphere, just see how that fog and atmosphere seem to be enveloping the space back here? Keep subduing the edges so that we really dissolve into a Turner-esque atmosphere back here. See how the edges are dissolving? Just dissolve.
It does make it look like it's going back.
Doesn't it?
Really far.
And that's the whole idea of atmospheric perspective, is just we've gone from this sharper focus into something soft and gauzy.
Looks good.
That was his chairmanship perspective, and atmospheric perspective he's a champion of. Now that we've had a chance to do some of this and glaze watercolor on top of other watercolors, and you know the only reason we could do it is these colors were dry. If these were not bone dry, when you go to do this,
it would pick it up.
It would pick it up, you get nothing. Subdue some of the lights, not all of them, so that they sparkle. If you leave too big of an area, and they won't snap and sparkle. Little areas, and you get sparkle.
This kind of unifies the squares of color.
Your architectural observation, Turner would be so proud, because remember, he studied to be an architect and thought about that first.
Well, this is interesting because I hadn't used white at all when I first started.
The advantage of white is that it allows you to get pastel tones. Now here we could go a little deeper, just a little deeper, just to hold the wings in.
The frame, yeah.
And then I'll kick the white out of here.
It's disappearing now.
Right. And I'm going to take that brown you were using and that blue you were using and try something deep and dark. Again, on top of your colors.
But you're using very little water, aren't you? A pretty dry
very
brush?
dry, because if we use too much water, as you probably tried when you were working on this, you noticed the paint just bubbled up and wouldn't adhere. But we're just starting to anchor the piece. See how this makes me feel like I'm looking over something if I get this to be dark? So we can see as if we're going over the wall here.
Oh, that really gives it some depth now.
Because we're looking over these trees, that pushes the town farther away. The more I subdue these darks and provide other darks out here on the edges.
Can we leave it like that? Because I like it kind of
Yeah, I'm good, brushy, brushy, brushy. The only problem is these darks pop up because the contrast level's a little high.
Soften that.
That's a neutral gray from your ultramarine blue and that
the burnt sienna.
Then we test it up here and see how gray it is. If it's a dark that's too strong, it's a forward dark, but just push them down.
Just a little.
And we can work both directions here. And I don't want to lose your drawing, because that's nice, and just get some more, a little more suggestive atmosphere. We're fighting off the rain here, yes, which is the worst kind of weather to do a watercolor in. The higher that contrast here, the greater the distance between this and this. Do you notice that?
Dark, light.
Exactly. One of the things that is fun about just working with atmospheric perspective is having a surface that's erasable, and you've got a surface that's erasable. That's a 19th century English tradition that was lost in the 20th century with people like John Marin when they wanted to do spontaneous, unconscious explorations of the medium of watercolor. No prepared paper, shoot from the hip, just see what's going on. People forgot how to prepare a paper. This whole process of a prepared surface, lost. And all you and I are doing is recovering it and reintroducing it. Marvelous effects. Up until Turner, light and color were ornaments. You used color as a tool. It filled things in. It gave things identity. People had used light expressively and used it religiously, from Da Vinci and from Rembrandt and from Caravaggio, but always it had been a supplement. It had not been a goal in itself. Turner turns painting around. Now light is the goal. Light is the purpose. He changes the direction of painting, elevating light as its raison d'etre. I'm David Dunlop. I'm a landscape painter.
On the next Landscapes Through Time, artist David Dunlop explores the inspiring cliffs of Etretat on the Normandy coast.